Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, who finished 3-9 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with a spring game on April 27th. We have a special guest joining us today. They are the authority on Louisiana Tech Athletics. You can catch them on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Central on Sports Talk 97.7. He is a Louisiana Tech alum and a former baseball player. He's also the owner and publisher of BleedTechBlue. He is Ben Carlisle. He can be found at BleedTechBlue on X. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, and excited to talk some Louisiana Tech football tonight.
Well, let's get to Louisiana Tech here. For folks not familiar with the Louisiana Tech's offensive scheme, how would you describe it to them?
Yeah, I think when Sonny Cumbie was hired at Louisiana Tech 2 years ago prior to the 2022 season, I think that, the hot word or the hot description was you're going to see an air raid offense. I wouldn't describe it as that. I would best describe it. It's an RPO-based scheme. In terms of run pass, they're probably 50-50. There could be given games where they're 55-45 or maybe even 60-40 throwing the ball. But they're looking to be balanced on offense. They'll play one running back, generally three receivers. They'll play a tight end in that 11 personnel set. I'm not saying that at this point in Cumbie's tenure, the tight end hasn't been a huge part of the offense. It's more of a big receiver type position where you don't necessarily get great blocking on the perimeter, but I think that's an area in which they're trying to improve in. Is just getting better quality blocking on the perimeter from that tight end position. But that's generally what they do offensively. They like to be balanced, and I think that's going to be a really big key for this 2024 team as we get going into fall camp at the beginning of August and into the season this fall.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Now, last year, Hank Bachmeier started the season, and if I remember correctly, I think he had a shoulder issue, which limited him to a few games. This offseason, he has transferred to Wake Forest, but due to his injury, Jack Turner got some meaningful snaps in 2023. How did Jack look in the spring, and would you say it's his job to lose going into the fall, or?
Yeah, I would certainly say it's Jack Turner's job to lose. Turner comes to Louisiana Tech from Navarro Junior College. Got here in 2022. He was coached actually by Louisiana Tech offensive coordinator Scott Parr at Navarro, and he only spent 1 year at Navarro. So didn't get a whole lot of playing time there. Didn't play much in 2022. You mentioned the injury to Bachmeier last year, and it allowed for Turner to make 4 starts. I would say it was a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of performance. You look at 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 57% completion rate. I will say when you dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, he completed 45% of his throws on non-screens. So if you're looking for improvement, that's where he has to get better at in the passing game. But he's a big kid. He's 6'5". He's 230, 235 pounds. He moves around pretty well. I don't know that I would necessarily describe him as a true dual threat quarterback, but he can certainly adequately get himself out of the pocket and make some plays with his feet. But getting those 4 starts a season ago, I know the hope internally is that kind of propels him to where not only is where he was more comfortable this spring, but he's more comfortable getting into the fall where there's live bullets are flying and you having to make quicker decisions to get some upper echelon talent. So I think that's a lot of the hope. And like I said, it's 4 career starts. It's 3 new starters on the offensive line. It's nearly an entire new receiving core. They're breaking in a lot of new starters on offense. So having a guy back that does have a little bit of experience certainly helps.
Who do you think will serve as the top backup to Jack Turner here in 2024?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Ty Keys was signed from a junior college, East Mississippi Community College, this past spring or in the late signing period, I believe. And he's a kid that started his career at Southern Miss, played a little bit as a true freshman. I think if you watch some of the tape, he obviously wasn't ready at that point in his career, but he's developed some. Evan Bullock's a redshirt freshman. Blake Baker's a redshirt freshman. Both those guys haven't played. And, going through the spring, it was kind of tough to decipher who might have had the lead. I would say at the end of the spring, Baker probably was the leading candidate for the backup role, but a lot can change over the summer. I think having a guy like Ty Keys, he just brings a different element. You mentioned Turner's size at 6'5", 230. He's not quite 6'5" as Keys, but he's built. He can run the football a little bit. He's probably more of a dual threat, whereas Turner throws it a little bit better. He probably runs it a little bit better. But I think all in all, when you look at the quarterback position for Louisiana Tech, it probably boils down to how successful is Jack Turner going to be, because when you get into some of these, a second string, third string, and we've seen it at Louisiana Tech numerous times over the past few years, some of those guys are backups for a reason, and it's sometimes difficult to strike gold when you have to go deeper into your depth chart.
Well, moving over to the running game, their leading rusher from 2023, Tyree Shelton, has graduated. Their next two leading rushers, Keith Willis Jr. and Sharvis Thornton, have both transferred out. And then Keldrick Moody, who also saw some times last year, has also graduated, leaving Marquise Crosby as the leading returning rusher from a year ago. But they also bring in Donario Davenport over from Texas State. How did the running back room look in the spring?
Yeah, I think the big question mark is Crosby. You go back to 2022, he rushed for nearly 1,000 yards, had 9 touchdowns. He dealt with injuries, really right after the 2022 season. Played, I think, 9 or 10 snaps in the middle of the year against UTEP, but ultimately just was unable to go. So I think if he's healthy, which it sounds like it's possibly trending in that direction. I know you don't necessarily want to, lay all your eggs in one basket with a guy that hasn't played in so long. But if he's healthy, he's really good. You mentioned Donario Davenport. He's a transfer from Texas State. Played a reserve role for G.J. Kinney and the Bobcats last year, but he was really good in that role, and he had a really good spring. I would say he's probably the leader in the clubhouse to take the first snap in the opener against Nicholls State. Now, I was impressed with O'Miri Wiggins, a JUCO transfer from Coffeyville. He's a Louisiana kid. He's just a sophomore. I thought he had a really strong spring. So I think they like where they're at with the running back position. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to have depth at that spot. And if Crosby is full go, you feel really good. If he's not full go, you start looking deeper into that running back room. A guy like Fred Robertson was signed out of Warren Easton High School down in New Orleans. So you kind of wonder where you're at if Crosby's not ready to go. But I know they feel really good about Davenport and Wiggins.
Now, last year you guys had a lot of injuries as well, and we saw Jacob Fields get some play time as a running back who was normally a defensive back. He had 26 carries for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Do you think is he going to move back to defensive back, or we'll see him at running back? Or
yeah, he was back at defensive back in the spring, and I think that's a more natural position for him. At the running back position, he was obviously very good. Had the game-winning touchdown in the first game of his career against FIU. But I don't know that the body's necessarily built to take a beating of a running back that gets 15, 20 touches a game. So he's been back at defensive back this spring, and I know they're excited for him. He was a talented kid coming out of high school. And in a way, you look at it from a defensive back development standpoint, he didn't get a chance to develop back there. So you wonder if this year is possibly a year that he redshirts. I know it's difficult to justify redshirting in this era of college football, but he's a talented kid. I think if he does figure out that safety spot, he could potentially be an all-league player down the road.
So, assuming Crosby comes back healthy, what do you think we see in terms of workload? Do you think we see one guy kind of dominate the running back room, or do you think we see a committee there with Davenport, Wiggins, and Crosby?
I think it would probably be Davenport and Crosby getting a majority of the carries. I think that you could pretty easily say that they'd probably just about be 50-50. You get into the fourth quarter of a game and one guy's running better than the other. That's kind of the guy you lean on. that's kind of how Louisiana Tech's trended under Cumbie in terms of that running back position. They'll clearly have their starter, but they'll divide things up. It's just so difficult to handle that sort of workload. And I think early in the year, if Crosby is healthy, I do think you want to keep some of that tread off his tires so that when you get to week 7, week 8, week 9, later in the season, he's got fresh legs, knowing that it's been a long time since he's played a bunch of snaps. So, like I said earlier, I think Davenport's the leader in the clubhouse. And then, you look at, the entirety of this offense. I think Davenport, Crosby, Wiggins, whoever it is, they're going to need to run the football effectively just to let Jack Turner and some of these new wide receivers settle in.
So speaking of the wide receivers, that wide receiver room is going to look quite a bit different here in 2024. True Edwards, Marlon Jackson, and Solo Lewis are the top returnees for the Bulldogs, but leading receiver from 2023, Smoke Harris, has graduated. Second leading receiver, Cyrus Allen, is off to Texas A&M, and third leading receiver, Kyle Maxwell, is off to Washington State. That means 72% of the targets and 70% of the yards from this room need to be replaced. How did the staff go about addressing these losses in the offseason?
First things first, it's not easy to replace that sort of production. Smoke Harris was tremendous throughout his career. Cyrus Allen had a big impact as just a guy that could go down the field vertically during his first 2 years in Ruston. And so I think the biggest question mark for me is you've added a guy like Jimmy Holiday from Western Kentucky. He started his career at Tennessee, so you know he's got raw talent. At the same time, I think his career high is 23 catches at the FBS level. You've added Abdul Fatih Ibrahim from Bowling Green. He was really good at his first stop at Alabama A&M, not quite as good at Bowling Green last year. You mentioned Solomon Lewis. You mentioned Marlon Jackson. I think that's the biggest question for this offense outside of the quarterback position because, as you know, it's a whole lot different being a reserve wide receiver versus being a wide receiver that opponents are game planning week in and week out or game planning against week in and week out. And so they've got to figure out, who's going to be their go-to guys on the outside and figure out how to get those guys into space and allow them to make some plays. But I thought Marlon Jackson had a really good spring. He's a guy that missed 2022 with an ACL injury as a true freshman, comes back last year as a redshirt freshman and dealt with some injuries at different times. But as the season progressed, you could tell with, how he was operating throughout games that he was kind of starting to figure some things out. So if he could take that next step at the receiver, he's probably your best bet to be a guy that can become a bona fide number one.
Gotcha. So if it's up to you and you're picking the starters for week 1 against Nichols, who do you think they are?
At wide receiver?
Yeah.
I'll say True Edwards in the slot, and then I'll say Marlon Jackson in one outside spot, and I'll say Jimmy Holiday at another. I think Solomon Lewis could easily find himself in that mix. He was a guy that didn't play for the first 9 or 10 weeks of the year last year, but late in the year got a chance to get some reps, and he could get down the field vertically. The issue for him, he's 5'9", and so you play an outside spot at 5'9", you're a little bit smaller. Some of those contested catches become a little bit more difficult. But I'll say Jimmy Holiday, Marlon Jackson, and probably True Edwards. And listen, a guy like True Edwards is a big target. He played outside early in the year last year. They shifted inside later in the year, and I thought he played really well in there. Now, it does change what you can do offensively because he's not your shifty scat back type of wide receiver that you can throw a bubble screen to and allow him to get 5 or 6 yards. So that changes a little bit what you do offensively, but I would imagine that those top three or those three guys are your wide receivers come week 1 against Nicholls State.
All right, moving over to the tight end group, you did a great job describing how they're utilized in this offense, but let's talk a little bit about the personnel. The leading receiver in this room, Ryan Rivera, has graduated, but this room does look to be in pretty good shape. They bring back Nate Jones, Eli Finley, and John Locke. How did this group look in the spring, and did anyone kind of step up to assume the tight end 1 role?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that somebody necessarily stepped up and assumed the role. I think you'll see all 3 of John Locke, Eli Finley, and Nate Jones. You could possibly see JUCO transfer Hunter Tipton at different times as well. Kendrick Rucker is a kid that's coming back from an ACL. He's got the body, he's got the athleticism at 6'5", 6'6", can really run. But like I said, you wonder where he's at coming off an injury. I would say Nate Jones is probably your best receiving target. He does a pretty decent job of getting down the field vertically. And then you can look at Locke or Finley in terms of the blocking game. If you're looking for the guy that's probably the most complete, I would say it's probably Eli Finley at this point. But he's a young sophomore, didn't play a ton of snaps a season ago, so he's still trying to get his feet wet in a sense. But all in all, you look at if the offense was to maximize itself, I would say it's because Eli Finley becomes a complete tight end, becomes a legit weapon over the middle that Jack Turner can go to when he's under duress.
All right, let's move over to the offensive line. They also have some holes to fill there as well. Starting right tackle Carson Bruno and left tackle Dakota White have transferred. Starting center Abraham Delphin has graduated. That leaves Burt Hale at left guard and Jaron Gilbert at right guard as the returners from this line from a year ago. What has the staff done to beef up this line in the offseason?
Yeah, first off, Burt Hale's been tremendous. I think he's one of the better players on the offensive line in Conference USA. Jaron Gilbert's a guy, he got better throughout the year, a season ago. He originally came in as a center, shifts over to that guard spot. And like I said, he was reliable. At the center spot, you're replacing a guy like Abe Delphin. He'd been in the program forever. I think he spent 7 years in Ruston. Landon Nelson took a lot of snaps in the spring, and so did Zarian McGill, a transfer from ULM, had a really good year for the Warhawks last year. So I think those two are going to be locked in competition. That's a competition that could even, drift into the season and be a week-by-week thing. And I think in the tackle spots, you talked about breaking in a new quarterback. Like, you got to be good at the tackle spots. Tech has struggled at protecting its passers over the last, I don't know, you can go all the way back to 2019 probably. And Kenneth Bannister's a kid that's been in the program for a while now. He'll get the first shot at left tackle. He had a strong spring. He's got the measurables. He's got the length to play a tackle spot at the Division I level. And on the right side, I like Daniel Keys, a transfer from SFA. He had previously been with Tech offensive line coach Nathan Young early in his career. So those two are familiar with each other. But it's like any team within college football. If you can't block up front, you're going to struggle to put together not only lengthy drives, but you're going to struggle to put the drives together, ever, or, at different points throughout a game if you're allowing penetration into the backfield. So that's a big question mark. But it's like I said in the open, you only got 2 returning starters. I think we're going to have a lot of questions about this offense until we see them prove, one way or another, positively or negatively, just how they're going to be. We need to see them more in live game action.
All right. If you have to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who you picking?
I'm going to take Marlon Jackson. He's a great kid, first off. He's had a really good, like I said, he came back from the ACL injury. He was ready to go at the top of fall camp last year, which is a quick turnaround. I think, like I said earlier, he's really – you could tell that he was progressing through the end of last year. I think that carried over into the spring. I think the body's starting to fill out. I think he's a guy that, could go out and catch 50-plus balls for 600 or 700 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns for you in 2024.
Awesome. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Fight, fight, fight for all red and blue. Show your might and we'll root for you. Get on your toes and you beat your foes and don't let them break through. Tech, 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 hit those lines like good old canines. Break through for